A guy became invisible and went straight to the nuked women's locker room. Who is this guy? Why did he do it? And most importantly, how did he even become invisible in the first place? Well, before we answer those questions, we need to go back to the beginning to see what started this whole mess. You see, it all began when an ordinary man named Harry Street accidentally walked into a parallel dimension while strolling through the park one day. To be honest, it didn't feel any different than walking into another part of the same park. The trees were still there, the birds were still singing, and the grass was still very much green. But something was off, and Harry soon realized that the slight shift in his surroundings meant he had just stepped into an alternate version of reality. But while exploring this strange new world, Harry quickly noticed that the people here looked identical to the ones back home, except for one noticeable difference. See, everyone in this universe had no idea who they were or where they came from. They all had blank faces and no memories of their past. And even though this might not seem like a big deal at first, it soon became clear that this was a serious problem. After all, if nobody knew who they were or where they came from, then they wouldn't know what to do or where to go. And so this world was slowly descending into chaos. As a result, the people spent most of their time trying to figure out who they were or where they could go for help. And unfortunately for Harry, the people thought he was one of them. And so he too had to play along. He tried explaining to them that he was from another dimension, but nobody believed him. They all just assumed he was crazy. And so after realizing that he couldn't convince anyone to listen to him, he decided to take matters into his own hands and try and fix this himself. He reasoned that if he could find the source of this mass amnesia, then maybe he could undo it and restore everyone's memories. But obviously, this wasn't going to be an easy task, because if he could do it, then the people who had access to this other dimension would have done it already. Regardless, Harry was determined to succeed where others failed, and so he began searching everywhere for clues. And after days of searching, he finally stumbled upon something strange. In the middle of a forest, he found a ring of stones that hummed with an unnatural energy, and after taking a closer look, he realized that these stones were actually the key to this entire mystery. As it turned out, these stones were a form of technology from the future that created a device known as the This device erased people's memories to turn them into mindless slaves, and given that this happened to everyone in this dimension, it meant that whoever was behind this must have been extremely powerful. And so now that he knew what he was dealing with, he could start looking for a way to undo it. However, there was a problem. Harry couldn't remember his own backstory either, and so he didn't know what kind of powers he had or how to use them. That being said, he was about to find out. You see, while in the other dimension, Harry somehow retained his memories, so when he returned home, he was able to look back at his life and realize that he was a superhero named Captain Nova. With this realization, he gained access to his superpowers, which included super strength, flight, energy manipulation, and even the ability to control matter at a molecular level. And with these abilities, he stood a chance against whoever was responsible for all this. So he flew back to the other dimension and got to work. First, he began searching for the source of the neuralizer's power, which led him to a giant machine hidden inside a cave. It was humming with energy, and Harry could feel its power even from far away. But even though it looked like the source, it wasn't. In reality, this was only a power generator that kept the neuralizer active. The real source was somewhere else, and Harry had to find it if he wanted to stand a chance. And so he continued his search, and eventually he found it. Hidden deep underground was a glowing orb that emitted a strange purple light, and as soon as Harry approached it, he felt his powers start to fade away. This orb was too powerful for him to handle, and if he couldn't stop it, then everyone in this dimension would be trapped forever. But luckily, Harry was able to stabilize the orb and bring it back to the surface. But even though he neutralized the threat, he still had to deal with the people who followed it. And let's just say he made a huge mistake. You see, when Harry exited the cave, he was confronted by hundreds of people who had followed him there, and since he was weak from using his powers, he couldn't fight them all. And so he began running for his life. He dodged cars, buildings, and even people, as he desperately tried to get away. But they were too fast for him and soon cornered him inside a supermarket. It seemed like all hope was lost until he remembered something. Captain Nova had once fought an enemy who absorbed people's life force, and that fight left behind some radiation that could boost anyone's powers to superhuman levels. And so he used his last bit of energy to activate this radiation, which caused an explosion that knocked out everyone who was chasing it. With them out of the way, he could finally tend to his wounds. But that was when he heard something that made him freeze in his tracks. The people who had chased him were getting up, but they weren't acting like normal people anymore. In fact, they looked like zombies who craved human flesh. And with that horrifying realization, Harry knew exactly what he had to do. Even though he could have easily defeated them, he chose not to. Instead, he fled the city and hid in the mountains where nobody could find him. And there he lived for years, hiding from the people whose memories he had restored. That being said, he wasn't really happy about this outcome. He had saved this dimension, but at what cost? He had destroyed his own humanity by turning these people into monsters. However, there was nothing he could do about it. There was no way to reverse this effect, and so he was forced to live with what he had done. That was until one day when a scientist discovered a way to reverse the effects of the new. This was great news, but it came with a catch. The process was dangerous and could kill Harry, but someone had to do it. And so he agreed to be the test subject. And after the procedure, he awoke in a hospital bed, feeling more alive than ever before. His memories were restored, and so were the memories of everyone else. They all remembered who they were and what they had done. However, instead of being grateful towards Harry, they hated him. They blamed him for everything that had happened and wanted revenge. And so once again, Harry had to run for his life. That's why when he heard about an abandoned water park on the outskirts of town, he immediately went there. He hid inside the park's old locker rooms and tried to come up with a plan, but the people were too quick and soon found him. They beat him up and told him that he would never escape what he had done. And that's when Harry came up with an idea. He pretended to be afraid and told them that there was a secret entrance to the parallel dimension hidden inside the women's locker room. This entrance would allow them to enter the other dimension without needing the new. And naturally, they fell for it. They entered the locker room to find the portal, but they never came out. You see, when they entered the locker room, they activated a security system that Harry had set up beforehand. The system locked the door and filled the room with a sleep gas that knocked everyone out. After making sure they were all unconscious, Harry exited the building and watched as they were all carried away by the authorities. In the end, he had tricked them into getting arrested, and while he knew that they would probably blame him for this as well, he didn't care. He had finally freed himself from their grasp and could finally move on with his life.